Good evening, everyone. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Liz Smith of Page75 Productions and everyone's hero du jour, Trudi Warner. Liz is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work intersects with lots of Good Law Project's themes on climate disinformation, on the struggling democratic process, on divided communities. Good Law Project and Page75 are working together on a couple of films, and we're expecting to host a screening in central London in September. And all of you watching today will receive an invitation in due course. Trudi is someone I've been lucky enough to know now for several years. I expect that later on,
1 year.
it feels like a lifetime.
It feels like a lifetime.
Trudy,
It's a year and a bit.
And later on she will tell you whether she is a likely or unlikely hero, but hero she most undoubtedly is. What's going to happen for the remainder of this evening's session is that Liz is going to show you some short clips from the footage that she shot for the film, working title The Environmental Defenders, and she'll ask questions to Trudi and me along the way. And she's also going to put to us questions that come in from you watching at home, as it's traditional to say. And if you have questions that you'd like Liz to put to me or Trudi, it's very easy. You type them into the comments or the chat of whatever channel you're watching through, and Good Law Project has people eager to read them, to pick them up, and they will be bounced through to Liz. So that's enough for me, and over to you, Liz.
Thank you very much. So people often ask why we're called Page75 Productions, and actually the answer to that question couldn't be more fitting context for tonight's event. Because in screenplay talk, page 75 is that all is lost kind of moment where your heroes come up against this big, devastating setback. But actually, because of their perseverance and their determination, after the page 75 moment, suddenly things turn to good and there's a positive outcome, and you get to the end of the film and you get the I am Spartacus moment. So tonight, this is why it's so fitting, we're going to hear all about the I am Trudi Warner moment. Now there's two reasons really why I've ended up involved in this and how Page75 Productions came about. And after I sort of finished a film I made a couple of years ago called I'm Gen Z, I started asking the question, why is it we're so polarised? And then, if we're so divided, how on earth are we going to solve this big existential problem that we have, which is the climate emergency? So I started investigating that, going down that route, thinking I was going to make a single film about this big, massive topic. And I don't think I knew what to expect doing that, but I can tell you all tonight that what happened and what followed certainly wasn't what I was expecting. Now, one of those routes I went down was following the climate activists here in the UK, following Just Stop Oil and the environmental defenders. And so tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through, show you 5 clips from that, and we'll be able to talk about what happened. It certainly opened my eyes, and a lot of you know some of this already, but there'll probably be things here that maybe you haven't seen or heard before. So shall we kick off? We'll kick off with the first clip. Now the first clip is a piece of filming that I did, actually the very first bit of filming I did, which was outside the Inner London Crown Court with members of Insulate Britain, which is kind of like a precursor to Just Stop Oil. And they were on trial for sitting in the roads and their direct action in the roads and the motorways. There were a lot of climate supporters there outside the court, really, in solidarity with them, including Trudi. And I was shocked to discover when I started filming this that they were being silenced in court and being criminalised for what was, yes, it was disruptive, but nevertheless peaceful protest. At that point, I was still labouring under the belief that, the right to protest and an independent judiciary is very much a solid plank of British UK democracy, and before my very eyes, I was seeing that that wasn't really the case. So we're going to kick off with a short clip, which is a discussion that I had with two of the defendants on that day, Ollie and Stephen. I didn't know you, Trudi, at the time, but looking back at the footage, there you are in the background. So anyone with beady eyes will spot Trudi there with her banners. So let's go ahead and play clip one.
Because of the judge's legal rulings, you're not allowed in the court to mention climate change, fuel poverty, or in fact make any moral justification of your actions whatsoever. Because of his rulings, he says this is irrelevant, and if you do talk about them, then you are potentially in contempt of court and you could be sent to prison. And yeah, I don't know how to describe this without calling our trial kind of a show trial. It's so dystopian.
I'm about to go into court to be sentenced. We were found guilty of public nuisance in January in a trial in which we were prevented from speaking in front of the jury about our motivations, anything to do with climate crisis, anything to do with insulation, anything to do with fuel poverty. So we were censored.
At our plea hearings, people were having protests about this, and I remember this lady down in Lewis was one of the court clerks or something, and she said, this isn't the right time to talk about climate change. Today, you just say guilty or not guilty. Don't talk about it today, you'll get in trouble. I don't want you to go to prison. You'll get to talk about that at your trial, and in the Crown Court trial, everyone will listen to you and you'll get your chance to speak. And that day, I didn't say much about climate change, I just said not guilty. And now I'm in a Crown Court trial. Look what's fucking happening. You can't fucking talk about it here either.
Today, however, I will be speaking some hard truths if I get the chance to speak them to the judge. So this will probably go badly for me. It will mean that I'm very unlikely to walk out of this building.
Over the last couple of years, there's been quite a lot of, last year there's been a lot of trials of climate activists who've taken direct action. But the experience as a defendant seems to be very dependent on the judge you get. So some, like Silas Reed, have been taking pretty extreme stance and not letting them explain their motivation in court. Others have been, more open and allowing that. And we've seen some really, really different outcomes from juries and jury trials, with some being acquitted and other not. I was quite shocked by this. Is this normal?
We all have this rather sweet notion, don't we, of the law and what it is and how it operates. And the sweet notion is that it's kind of a science, it's a scientific instrument for delivering just results. And then you're confronted with the reality, which is some way removed from that sweet notion, where very often the moment when you decide when you work out whether you're going to win the case or lose the case, is not when the judge hands down her judgment, but when you see who your case has been listed before. It's absolutely orthodox to say that barristers routinely opine, often feel that they know what the outcome of the case is going to be, not before they know who the case is going to be heard in front of, but as soon as they do, and that everything that follows after that is just mere performance. So it isn't right, but it is true.
And has it always been true, or has it got worse?
I think it's probably always been true. So Good Law Project's about to embark on a project with our friends Rights to Equality about bias in the family courts. Family judges have got very, very different approaches on relationships between, in particular, fathers and children, on what constitutes acceptable and unacceptable behaviour within the household. Good Law Project experiences very singular treatment from some judges who are uncomfortable with the use that we make of the law. We don't experience that treatment from other judges. But I suspect it's always been true, right? Something of a Dylan song, Lily Rosebery and the Jack of Hearts, where he talks about the hanging judge being sober, he hadn't had a drink. You know, judges always bring much more of themselves to the process of judging than the very stories would have in.
But are you seeing the judgments against the climate activists being harsher than you would expect, or?
Well, I think undoubtedly yes. So there were a couple of climate protesters who received sentences more severe than at the bottom end of a sentence for somebody convicted of rape. And these were people who caused significant disruption on a road, but they had no bad motive. There was nothing dishonest. They didn't destroy anyone's life. And so to me, their crime was far, far less serious than the crime of raping somebody, and yet their sentence sits above the lower end of the range for a convicted rapist. So I think that's bananas. I mean, the broader point, I suppose, is that judges move as the political wind moves, and the political wind with, I suppose, our right-wing media huffing and puffing is very, very hostile to people who are older and so have less to lose from having a criminal conviction, and people who are younger, for whom the climate crisis is going to have far more profound effects than those of us in middle age. The political attitude, the political winds are very, very hostile to those people, and the sentences reflect that political atmosphere. Judges are human beings; they sit in the same climate, if you'll forgive the pun, as the rest of us, and are buffeted by its winds. And again, that's not how justice is supposed to be. That's not what's written in the fairy story, but it's undoubtedly true.
In that clip we've just seen, this was around the time, Trudi, that you had this idea that you were going to hold this billboard outside the Inner London Crown Court. And that's what set off this chain of events that we're going to be talking about tonight. Can you talk about how you came to make the decision to do that, and what impact you thought that might have at that point?
I certainly didn't think it would have the impact that it has had. My concern was that I had watched several of these trials, and I just felt so strongly about people not being able to talk about their motivation that somebody had to do something about it. Now, I suppose what particularly worried me was that judges were telling juries that all they had to do was decide on the evidence alone whether the people had done this thing or not. Okay, and if they had done it, they had to convict them. So it was a straightforward binary choice. Yeah, they've done it or they haven't done it. And they weren't denying they'd done it. You know, in that sense, it's not a trial because nobody was saying, you know, no, I didn't do it. They were completely accountable, you see. And I was also aware that jurors were leaving. Some jurors were leaving these trials in tears because they had this binary choice and they felt that they were kind of in a straitjacket. And I had actually learnt about jury equity at school, and I knew that there was a kind of middle way. But I also realised that these jurors didn't know that. Because although this legal principle exists, you know, it's not widely known about. And I think even now very few people know about it, let alone feel they can actually use it. So simply, I just wanted them to know that this existed. I wasn't sort of trying to, I mean the implication is that I was trying to sort of sway a jury. I wasn't trying to do that. I just believe that people should know their rights. Whether or not, what people then do is their decision, you know, and I mean, I did social work and I believe that people should be self-determining. And, you know, you tell them what their choices are, you make them aware of what the consequences might be, but ultimately they choose. And I feel very strongly about that. So all I wanted to do was for them to know.
So basically that day you turned up as a human billboard,
Yeah.
outside the
yeah.
inner London Crown Court on the street,
Yeah.
so people would be aware that this concept
Yeah.
existed,
Yeah.
that you could acquit someone
Yeah.
on your conscience.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to say, if you've got any questions for Trudi and Jolyon, do put them in the chats on the social media, and some of them will feed through to me so I can ask them questions too. We're going to continue on with this story, what happens next. So while I was covering what was going on with the trials, I heard a message from one of the climate activists saying that Trudi had been arrested by Judge Cyrus Reed. So I rushed over to find out what had happened, and this is the clip 2, which you're going to watch now.
There's not a lot of details right now, so the main thing that we're saying to people is get down to the Inner London Crown Court if you can. She's being held in the Inner London Crown Court in the cells down below. She's going to be brought in front of Judge Cyrus Reed. That's all we know at the moment.
I'm heading over to the Inner London Crown Court. There were 2 climate protesters outside in solidarity for those who are being tried inside, like they have been for the last 2 weeks. But one of them has been arrested. Not exactly sure why, so I'm off to find out.
So yesterday, Trudi did a one-person action. She just stood at the jurors' entrance with a sign that says that they could acquit someone depending on their conscience. And we had agreed that she would do the morning shift here today and I would come at 2:30, and I came in and there was no banners and no Trudi. And yeah, checked in with the police, and yeah, so she's being held in the basement. But now the update that we have is that Trudi is going to be released today to be tried in the High Court next week. Yeah.
That's pretty quick, right?
Yeah. Oh, here she is. You gotta be worried.
I've got some soggy banners here.
Some very soggy banners. That's okay. We'll dry them.
How about those years of plenty and the shot in his back? Did you say it wasn't proper? Did you say
Oh my God.
you were quiet just like now
Trudi, Trudi.
eyes, so if that is
So, Trudi, in that clip, we see you in that moment when you're released from the cells. Can you actually tell us about the arrest and what actually had happened that morning?
Yes, well, this was the day after I went with the placard. I went with the placard on the Monday. So this was on the Tuesday morning when I'd gone to the court on my own without the placard. And I had simply gone to put up some of the banners that Insulate Britain had been using. And it was pouring with rain, so I put the banners up on the front of the court and went under the porch for shelter. And I was just standing there. And some police officers ran up the steps past me, and I thought, oh gosh, you know, there's a drama happening in the courtroom, you know. And then they came running down the steps and handcuffed me and took me down to the
You were the drama.
So I was, in fact, the drama. And in the court cells, which are like the dungeon, because they're right below the court, you know, they're really dark and horrible cells, the staff were really trying to persuade me to go and apologise to the judge, because they said, just apologise, please, just apologise. We don't want you to go to prison. I mean, they were lovely, you know. But I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. So I was taken up at 5 o'clock or something at the end of the day, and told I would be going to the Old Bailey. So that felt quite draconian, I would say.
Draconian, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I can imagine.
It's the Central Criminal Court.
Yeah.
You know, where you go for murder and rape and, you know, massive crimes. So I was a bit shaken, I have to say. I took a few minutes kind of breathing in the lobby.
I mean, that actually brings me to my next question, is in that clip, we see you coming out and you've just been released, you're like skipping and you're happy. How do you do that?
Well, I came dancing down the path, partly because I needed to actually move. You know, because when you're cooped up, you just sort of, you know, come outside and you think, you know, you need to move your body. So there was that. But also, I was just really, really happy to see people there. Because I had been on my own in the morning, I didn't know if anybody even knew that I was in the court cells, you see. So when I came out and I had the joy of seeing people there, and I think people cheered and clapped, I mean, it was just such a relief, really. So that's why I was dancing.
Oh, that was wonderful to see. We have a few questions coming in, which is great. Tim on YouTube is asking, I think this is a question for you, Jolyon. Is it illegal to contradict a judge's directive?
It depends on who you ask. It depends on who the judge has asked to do or not do something. It also depends on whether it's a direction or an order. It depends on the circumstances, basically, but certainly in some circumstances, it can be a contempt of court. You can go to prison for not doing what a judge orders you to do. It's how, for example, judges enforce injunctions in relation to privacy cases brought by philandering footballers, usually.
I think it might actually be a useful juncture if you could just explain to everyone this concept of jury equity and what it is and why it's important. Because this is what jury equity is actually what Trudi's billboard was all about.
Yeah, so the state is all powerful, right? And the most, the greatest power that the state has is to lock up people that it doesn't like. And the criminal law is sometimes incredibly vague. It can be impossible to know sometimes whether things are legitimate forms of protest and lawful, or legitimate forms of protest for which you might be arrested for criminal damage or aggravated trespass. It's all incredibly vague. And in a political climate like the one that's predominated over the last 3 or 4 years, where government is, I think, because it doesn't have much better to tell the people, going aggressively against climate activists, eco-extremists, or however they're badged in the right-wing press, and where judges are, at least some judges are, picking up that judicial mood. That power to imprison people, to lock people up, to deprive them of their liberty, is apt to be abused. And so you then get against that background to this notion of jury equity for serious criminal cases. You have the right to be tried before a jury. And the function that the jury fulfills is a very, very important function. The function that the jury fulfills is to temper this power that the state has to lock up, in the setting that I described, those that are politically inconvenient to the state. But juries have to, and juries temper that power to lock people up by basically saying, I don't care what the law is, this is a prosecution that is wrong. This is a prosecution that is offensive to us, 12 women and men, good and true, and we will acquit whatever the judge tells us. That is the power of the citizen collectively to fight back against overweening state power. But, and everyone's heard Trudi's explanation, judges sometimes are very, very reluctant to allow jurors who they think might be sympathetic to exercise that power, to operate that safety valve, to protect people from the mighty state. And that was the point that Trudi was making. You have this right. It's a really important right. I'm not telling you how to exercise it, but you must know that you have it.
And what we've been seeing is in the courts, some juries have been acquitting climate activists for their direct action, and other juries haven't. But if you take away the notion from a jury that they can make a decision based on their conscience, then that's not going to happen. And that's really what was at stake, is at stake here, and what we're discussing today, for sure. We've got some nice comments coming through actually on Twitter. Lots of, Josephine says, thanks so much, Trudi Warner. We've got someone dropping in saying, Trudi's a legend. You have become, rather perhaps unintentionally, a bit of a legend for us all. You mentioned already that you were shocked because you were told on that day that you were going to have to go to the Old Bailey in 8 days' time. For a hearing, which seems extraordinary, because as you point out, that's the central criminal court, right, where they try sort of really
Jack the Ripper and
Jack the Ripper and Trudi Warner.
And Trudi Warner.
Apparently, yeah.
Not the most natural of bedfellows, you would think.
Yeah, but the other thing I was surprised about was not only that she was sent to the Old Bailey, but she was due to appear in just 8 days after the arrest. Is that normal, that it's A, something like that would happen at the Old Bailey, and B, so quickly?
Well, Liz, I'm a King's Counsel, and I'm a Gen X man, and I'm white, and these days I'm very privileged. So of course I know everything, but small confession, I know very, very little about the criminal law, and I don't know what the timetable is typically in criminal courts. A rare moment that should be captured for posterity. Somebody with all of those attributes confessing that he just has no idea.
Yeah. Well, it was quite extraordinary to me as a layman to suddenly find Trudi in the Old Bailey rapidly in 8 days like that. So we're going to go and play clip 3 now, which is in fact the day at the Old Bailey when Trudi turns up for her hearing.
you feeling about Tuesday in the Old Bailey?
I think what I've realised is you just have to surrender to it. It's a bit like, you know, the cold water swimming, you know, you stand on the edge and then in you go, and then when you're in.
It's the 4th of April and I'm going to the Old Bailey today. The Old Bailey's the Crown Court in central London, and it's where they try like big criminal cases.
Will you get some high vis on now then?
So Nick, this is a plaque that's inside this building. All of that plaque is like really interesting history, but this is the essential point, and this is essentially what Trudi was saying on her own placard. By Trudi making that point, she's been told that she's in contempt of court, and yeah, it's obscene.
Nobody has any idea what could happen next.
How are you so calm?
I think I'm calm because I'm really very sure about what I'm doing, and it's like it says on these placards. You know, when you're doing something out of conviction, it grounds you.
These lists already in the building, so this is just information.
Okay, got to go.
Bye. All the best.
I'd like to come in, but I'm not allowed in with my phone. Can you give me my phone?
Thank you.
Good luck, Trudi. I cannot believe that's happened.
It was a shock.
Who's been arrested?
Kathy, up there, coming out of public gallery.
Just now?
Just now. 2 people came over, contempt of court, same thing. Perverting the course of justice, same thing.
But what was she doing?
I don't know the story, but something about posters.
Yeah, I'm going to try and summarise what's happening, but it's very unclear at the minute. It's not the end of it today for Trudi. She's got to go and be put in front of the Attorney General. So that's very serious and a massive escalation. They're in control of British law, effectively, as far as I understand it. So it's like you're at the top of the legal hierarchy. That's big stuff. The other thing that's happened is that one of our number has been arrested while coming out of court. It's not clear why they've been arrested and what connection that has with what happened with Inner London Crown Court and Trudi. It's just an escalation in terms of what the government is doing and the legal powers are doing to repress this movement and the people in it. So we're in a real critical moment here. It's quite scary stuff. I think this is all about intimidation, frankly.
Trudi, when you came out of the Old Bailey, you were understandably looking a bit shocked by the outcome. What had actually happened inside, and how were you feeling sort of when you came out and in the days that followed?
Well, I was told, by my solicitor that there were various possible outcomes. And the worst one would be to be referred to the Attorney General, because that would be very unusual, possibly even unprecedented, I don't know. But he said, if that were to happen, we are really in uncharted waters. We don't know what that would mean. So obviously that was what did happen. So, I had been warned that that was the worst possible scenario.
And then the next few days, as this is sinking in, you must be in a state of sort of, what do I do? What
there was nothing, in a sense there was nothing I could do, because you commit to something and you surrender, really, because And I had planned to go away, actually, to a Scottish island, so I went. And I completely forgot about it all, really, and just kind of, I knew it would be a waiting game, and I thought, well, I'm not going to sit and twiddle my thumbs.
Turned out to be quite a long waiting game, didn't it? Yeah. I mean, Jo, at this point, this has now become a David versus Goliath story here. And, I mean, can you explain what it means for an individual like Trudi, a sort of normal person, to find themselves up against the state?
I mean, that's exactly how it is. You don't understand the rules. Indeed, you're not even sure that there are any rules. You're reliant on a bunch of professionals to talk you through what's happening, but you hear from them that they have no idea how things are going to pan out. I mean, Trudi's is not a face that you would look at as a judge and want to lock up for a long period of time. Certainly not were I a judge. And so, you're thinking that if you're a lawyer advising Trudi, surely a judge is going to see that this is somebody who is doing a very, very conscientious thing, exercising an important free speech right, telling a fundamental truth about how the justice system is supposed to operate, interjecting to protect jurors from being denied the ability to exercise their core function by judges who did not want them to exercise that core function in some cases. How could you think that that was a profoundly serious criminal offence sufficient for the referral to the Attorney General? I mean, Good Law Project works with a lot of lawyers. We're one of the biggest commissioners of lawyers in the country, and I know, and I'm a King's Counsel, right? So I used to be a decent lawyer myself, and I know how difficult it is to tell people, particularly in these political show trials, and Trudi's was a political show trial, what the judge will do. If it's difficult for the lawyers, it's impossible for somebody who is a complete ingenue, a sort of babe in the woods, and fearsome woods they are, because they could lead you to be locked up for a very, very long period of your life.
I believe it's up to 2 years you could be imprisoned for contempt of court, right? I mean, that must have been weighing on your mind. Am I going to end up in jail for 2 years, right?
Yes.
And how did you reconcile that in your mind whilst you were on your Scottish island and in this state of limbo?
I generally face these things by thinking, well, what's the absolute worst that could happen? And sort of preparing myself for the absolute worst that can happen, and then anything else is a bonus. So, I was thinking, well, 2 years would be 1 year.
A year in prison. I mean, you've worked in prisons as well, so you know what it's like.
Yeah, I've worked in prisons, and I've spent time, visiting people in prisons, and I was always very, very pleased at the end of the day to leave. And to skip down the path, because they're really, really oppressive places. And I'm sure they're worse now than they were then, because they're overcrowded, they're hot, they're understaffed, I think anyone in prison at the moment is having a very, very hard time.
There's somebody who said here, Tim on YouTube, shouldn't incarceration be reserved for those in society who are a danger to society? Hardly true for Trudi. I mean, that's certainly the case. The first clip we saw, Stephen ends up in prison as well for a number of weeks. Ollie had also previously been in prison for his direct action. And what I found extraordinary about that is these people, Trudi included, are the kindest, gentlest people on the planet who are least likely to do any harm whatsoever. And here we are in a situation where our prisons are overloaded to the extent, I believe, that they're now giving advice to not give people prison sentences. So it just doesn't compute that these two things are going on. I mean, what do you make of that, Jovian?
Yeah, we seem to have entered a kind of topsy-turvy world. I remember when Boris Johnson lied in the House of Commons, and Dawn Butler called him out for it. And it was not Boris Johnson who was kicked out of the House of Commons by the Speaker. It was Dawn Butler. Yeah. And there's something of that in Trudi's case, right? She has gone along to tell the truth about a very, very profoundly important constitutional right that jurors have for the protection of society at large from a bullying and aggressive state. She's described that right truthfully. Indeed, there is a sign in the Old Bailey, as I understand it, that says exactly what Trudi's sign says. And she's facing a 2-year prison sentence for telling the truth. It's quite extraordinary. It's kind of Emperor's New Clothes territory. It's really, really important, I think, to remind ourselves of this stuff, which is clearly, obviously true. Trudi is still facing a potential 2-year prison sentence for telling the truth.
Denise on YouTube said the pen is scarier than the sword to hostile environment upholders. Jack W said, I just want to say a massive thank you to Trudi. She's amazing and she stays strong no matter what. And what has been impressive seeing you on this journey is your resilience. And where does that resilience come from? Difficult question, that, isn't it?
There's a personal story I could tell, which I can't. But I've had a brush with the law before in an entirely different matter, which probably prepared me a bit for this. But I think my life experience really, you know, because I did do social work and I've had struggles along the way, and you just learn, you build a bit of muscle, and you know yourself well enough to know to have some coping strategies.
Yeah.
And I've had some good advice and some good help from people along the way, so I just feel blessed that I'm in this place where I have this resilience now, which I didn't have when I was younger.
Well, you certainly needed it in this last sort of year or so that we've been on this journey. What happens next is you're actually left in limbo for a very long time. I think you get through the post an enormous package. What do you get through the post eventually?
It wasn't an enormous package, actually. Oh. No, I mean, over these months, you know, most people were saying to me, you know, this is ridiculous, Trudi, you know, nothing's going to happen. They'll drop it. You know, don't worry about it, you know, it won't go anywhere. And I sort of almost convinced myself that they would drop it. And then the brown envelope arrived. But it wasn't a thick one, it was a thin one.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I was quite optimistic because I know legal bundles are usually thick.
Yeah.
And this was thin. So I thought, oh, it's a letter saying to me that, you know, it's all over and done with, and, you know. But in fact it wasn't. It did say, His Majesty's Solicitor General versus Trudi Warner.
Really was Trudi versus the
So
state.
it was that.
Wow. Wow. Well, whilst you're in this then period of almost a year of limbo, waiting for the next stage to happen, I was still out there filming, and I was filming Just Stop Oil during their summer campaign of slow marching and some of the cultural actions, some of the direct actions. Now, during that 13-week period, I witnessed literally firsthand the extent to which our protest rights are being eroded, and how in particular it's the climate activists who are being targeted. The first slow march I covered, I remember, you know, this was actually slow marching down the street. Was not illegal, and the group were able to march around Piccadilly for a couple of hours. But by the end of the 13-week campaign, literally within just putting one foot on the road, they were arrested in handcuffs, boom, in the vans. It was extraordinary. But also during this period, it's when the new Public Order Act was rushed through. It was rushed through just before the coronation. Well, this next clip is actually about what happened at the coronation with the Just Stop Oil activists and myself. So let's play clip 4.
All we had was Just Stop Oil t-shirts and flags in our pockets that we were going to unfurl and spread.
What we planned to do was get a prominent location on the mall, not too far from the barriers. When Charles's coach was on its way, and as it passed, we planned to show our t-shirts and our banners in silence, have what is an essential message, have that seen by such a huge audience.
I expected the moment that we got our orange flags out for them to pounce on us, even though it was a fully legal protest. I wasn't quite expecting to get nicked 2 hours before the king was even meant to pass the place where we were. Once I realized that they were coming straight towards us, I was like, okay, yeah, guess we're not going to get to protest.
So you're under arrest at the moment?
I'm just standing here.
Let me explain to you. So at the moment, I'll pop that in your bag if you like.
You're scared.
Okay, there's no need to be frightened.
I think they were trying to say that we were going to throw like powdered paint over the coronation track.
While people were getting arrested, I was slightly on the edge, so I was videoing it on my phone, and then the police officer looked at me, thought, okay, you're probably part of this, and then he forced my phone into my pocket, and then I think he got me to unzip my jacket, and then cuff me.
I was arrested for a crime I might commit in the future that I wasn't intending to commit. It's so Orwellian.
Why am I being arrested?
Over the coronation weekend, police arrested 64 people, 52 of them suspected of plotting disruption.
And he explained breach of the peace, and that's when he explained that it requires this element of harm, and they have intelligence that we had paint. But then, you know, I continued debating with him about this, and like, I still don't understand, because you're saying, you know, this is the grounds for the arrest, and we're here, and I haven't met the grounds.
That I ended up being arrested for 4 different things by the end of my stay in custody. The first thing I was arrested on was breach of the peace.
The first offence we were actually arrested for was breach of the peace.
This is peaceful protest in the UK.
This is outrageous. All I did was
Slower!
They searched us, no paint was found.
I just decided to go floppy. I let all of my body weight go, and they sort of just laid me on the floor and further arrested me for obstruction.
We got taken away to the vans.
And then when we got to the van, I was further arrested for conspiracy to cause criminal damage, despite no evidence of any equipment to cause criminal damage. And then once we got to the police station, the arresting officer came into my cell and told me that I was now further arrested for conspiracy to commit a public nuisance.
He came to the letterbox at the cell door later and re-arrested me for, conspiracy to cause a public nuisance.
I was in the station for 12 hours.
I was released after 18 hours.
Regular protest rights, regular human rights were on pause during the coronation, and that's something that more people should be really terrified about.
That law is being shaped around like curtailing our freedoms, but it curtails everyone's. You know, it's everyone's right is to step up and step into protest. And it might not be that you're motivated by what we're motivated by, but there'll be something. And with these laws in place, those freedoms are gone.
Joe, at this point, I'd sort of already witnessed the extent to which Just Stop Oil protests were being clamped down on by the police, so I knew that there was a chance that just by being near them and around them that I could get targeted too. But if I'm completely honest with myself, I never really thought that would actually happen. But it did. You know, at that point I still believed we had a free press, in the UK. And what other people might not know is I'm not the only member of press who has been arrested while filming Just Stop Oil. How worrying is it that this has happened?
It's the same point really about the stories that we tell ourselves about what the law is and how the law operates, and how those stories depart profoundly from the reality. The notion that Britain has this kind of fine and noble and brave fourth estate that can report on whatever it wants without police interference, we have a truly free press, is the wonderful cockle-warming story we tell ourselves. But the reality is that reporting on stuff that is inconvenient to power, you'll be sued in the courts for defamation, you'll be imprisoned, probably falsely imprisoned by the police. There are lots and lots and lots of examples, and the police apologise when they arrest somebody from a kind of an establishment out there. So if you're an ITV journalist and you get accidentally arrested by the police who think they're arresting some eco-warrior nobody-lers like you, as they would see it. Obviously I don't. Then they apologise. I mean, there's a sort of broader theme here as well, I think. If you are black, if you're a black man, your experience of institutions, how they operate, what they do, is one that you have known since you were a child, is far removed from these fairy stories that we tell ourselves about what the country is. But something quite interesting has happened, and I guess I would trace it back to Brexit, really. A whole group of people who had previously experienced the country's institutions as being on their side, as understanding that their role was to protect, to act, not quite in the public interest, but at least to act in their interest, is starting, that demographic, to have its eyes opened to the reality that minoritized groups have always experienced. So we are learning that people who are white and nicely spoken and apparently respectable, like Trudi. I was alarmed to hear about your previous brush with the law, Trudi, by the way.
No, but it's totally different from this, completely different.
I'm much relieved to hear that. But that you can, possessing all of those qualities, being like, just kind of good people, right? Like us, not those people who are always rightly getting locked up, but normal people can tell the truth and be abominably mistreated by the system, can be threatened with a long prison term, can be arrested if you're a journalist. And I think there's something there that's worth capturing and holding, actually, because if you reflect on the fact that it happens to you with all of your privilege, it gives you a really important insight into what life is like for everybody else. And people watching, I would say that is a really, really important lesson for you to take from watching a clip about journalists being arrested and listening to Trudi facing a long prison term for telling the truth about an important constitutional safeguard.
Jackie on YouTube said, "This is so timely. What are the chances that the new government will restore our protest rights?" Keir Starmer, when this happened, said after the coronation that he was not going to repeal the new Public Order Act, which I find certainly disappointing and somewhat worrying. There was, however, very recently a successful court case against Suella Braverman and the government, where they were shown, it was Liberty, the human rights organisation that took them to court, and they were shown to have acted unlawfully by using this sort of statutory instrument to change the law, to give the police powers to restrict protests. So it went from you had to be causing some sort of major disruption to get arrested, and they changed the words to it has to be more than minor disruption and you'll get arrested. And I mean, what is major, what is minor disruption? But they actually were successful in court very recently. So Joe, as an expert in using the law to hold power to account, this is a successful example of that. But as a layman, what I'm interested to understand is, well, what is the implications of this ruling against the government?
So I guess I'd make 2 points. The first is that no institution is a monolith. So, and indeed it's a point that we've already talked about this evening, that although you have some judges who are very, very hostile to those protesting against the climate crisis, you have some judges who are not. And that which is true of judicial attitudes to climate protesters is also true of judicial attitudes to everything, to everyone else. So the institutions are not monoliths. And embarrassingly, I've forgotten the second point. I was busking a bit there.
I was just kind of, they've been successful in court to say actually what they did by rushing this through secondary legislation is wrong, but it doesn't seem to, it's not going to result in the new Public Order Act being repealed. What are the consequences for government when you do successfully take them to court?
Yeah, well, and that's the other point I was going to make. So I talked about judges blowing with the wind of power, whether the wind of power is from the puffed cheeks of the Fourth Estate or from government. And judges were bending that way for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons was that they were experiencing this government as very, very threatening. So I still find it extraordinary, but I woke up one morning on my summer holidays in August 2022 to read a caption beneath a photo in the Daily Express. Photos of me, caption was "Public Enemy Number 1", and Rishi Sunak had sent out a press release in which I had been named 10 times And he basically said to judges, unless you stop this man, I will change the law and I won't even need Parliament's consent to do it. I will just do it because I will be a minister, I will be the Prime Minister. And judges took that stuff very, very seriously. Of course, power will switch on the 4th of July. But it's not a binary thing, right? The polls have been pretty clear as to what the outcome of the general election is going to be for quite a long time. So judges have taken those threats less seriously, so they've felt more able to do their jobs properly. None of this happens in their conscious mind, I would say. Generalising, none of this happens in their conscious mind. But the notion that it doesn't influence how they approach the process of exercising their important constitutional function as judges, I think is for the birds. I think plainly decisions like the Liberty decision arrive in a context in which judges feel better able to do their jobs.
I mean, this is absolutely key. Obviously, an independent judiciary is key to a well-functioning democracy. But if you're in a position where those in power can go, well, we're just going to change the law if it doesn't suit us, then we're in a dire state. And there's lots of examples recently.
The Rwanda legislation being a very obvious example in which Parliament decided in its wisdom to legislate that the moon was made of cream cheese. Plainly, Rwanda is not a safe country, but Parliament instructed judges to pretend as true that which is false.
Yeah, it's getting very Orwellian at this point, isn't it? Interestingly, while I've been making this film about the clamping down on the protest rights of climate activists and the science and criminalisation of that, I've also been making a film about the anti-immigration rhetoric that's going on and the pushback on asylum rights, etc. One of the things which has been interesting to observe is I've also been filming those activists supporting the asylum seekers in action, doing direct action. And there's been things where I've been filming and I've been thinking, gosh, if these were the climate activists, if this was Just Stop Oil doing this right now, they would be in handcuffs already. So having been making these films in parallel, I've really observed that actually at the moment, Just Stop Oil and some of the climate activist groups are specifically being very, very targeted. What we've got to worry about as well, beyond that, you say you don't care about the climate movement and Just Stop Oil, say you don't, you should still be worried about this, because next time it could be you, it could be your movement where you're the ones who are being targeted and clamped down on because of laws that are coming through, like the new Public Order Act, which are just giving police extended powers. And even the new government that's coming in is saying, well, we'll leave it in place, just in case. We've got some lovely comments coming through on YouTube. Trudi and Kate says, Trudi, you're a powerhouse and example to us all. Thank you. Trudi's a danger to government's need to keep promoting gas and oil, presumably so they can make a profit from it. She's not a danger to the population. I think we can concur that you're not a danger to the population. So do keep the questions coming in. We're going to now just go back to Trudi's story. So pretty much a year has gone by now. Trudi set off this landmark case without realising she was going to, which was going to have massive implications for this concept that's existed for eons in the legal system, which is jury equity, which we've talked about already. So we're going to now see, this clip starts on the day of Trudi's permission hearing at the Royal Courts of Justice. Before we play the clip, could you just explain, Jolyon, what a permission hearing is?
Yeah, so there are various types of legal procedure that are apt to be abused. And to protect the procedure from abuse, the law is set up to require that the instigator of that legal procedure pass a sort of minimum threshold. Is this a sensible thing to do on the facts, or is it probably abusive so that it should be stopped at the outset?
So this is what we were going to the Royal Courts of Justice for that day, to have this hearing to decide whether the judge would give permission for this to continue to trial or not. So if we can play the clip.
This is one I sent this morning. Solidarity today with suffragette of our times, Trudi Warner, who this wicked government wants to criminalise for telling the truth.
Very good.
Oh dear.
Attorney General is a funny sort of role. It's a bit legal advisor and a bit politician.
It's a political appointment, isn't it?
It is a political appointment.
Yeah.
So today's a permission hearing.
That's right.
What is a permission hearing?
You have permission hearings in lots and lots of different types of legal proceedings. There's a permission stage to filter out, to weed out sort of really weak cases. It would be quite a thing for the court to say the case is so hopeless that you don't cross that threshold.
Oh dear. That's not what I wanted to hear.
Oh, I'm sorry, Trudy.
Why does the government even care about this? Why has this become such a landmark case?
I think it's touched a nerve. There was something kind of that was, you know, in a casket, and I've broken it. Something has escaped which was not supposed to be out there in the public eye.
There is a kind of defiance to your protest, and I see the very aggressive prosecution of your case as being of a piece with that, about crushing the will of those who are trying to protect our children's futures. I mean, the whole climate activism, policing piece is really, really troubling. Climate activists are policed far more aggressively than anyone else.
Does it boil down as simply as to this is just about protecting financial interest?
I mean, if you try and rationalise the super aggressive policing, if you ask yourself the question, well, how does that make sense? What is driving this allocation of police resources? I don't think there are any other candidate explanations than it is about protecting big oil.
We need to go. Right, let's go.
I can't say anything. I'm only allowed to say thank you.
So what happened?
Thank you so much. We're back on Monday at 10:30 for a decision about permission. I'm ready for whatever happens today.
Do you have any feeling of what you think, how it's going to go?
I play tennis. You know, what if this happens? What if that happens? In one sense, it doesn't change anything for me, because if we win today, we've won a battle, but we haven't won the war.
That was worth it. That was worth it.
So, that's where the outcome, what we've just seen in the clip, is the outcome and where we currently stand today. As we go into the last sort of 15 minutes of this live stream tonight, just want to say this is your last 15-minute opportunity to ask questions to Trudi and to Jolyon, so keep posting them into social media and they will wend their way over here. Trudi, that moment when the judge, when Justice threw it out, how did you feel?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think I probably, I don't know. Quite euphoric. I mean, but I think that took a few minutes to kick in. I was just aware that there was this atmosphere in the courtroom that was really kind of quite electrifying, and when I came out, you know, there were people standing outside, you know, with tissues and yeah.
I mean, we had this conversation outside the courthouse after that, and I said, you know, along this journey, there's been times where I've started questioning myself. Am I going mad here? Because this seemed nuts that you were going through this, and it was kind of a moment of vindication. I mean, were there sort of doubts in your mind during this process?
I never doubted what I was doing. I never doubted that at all. No, I didn't doubt what I was doing.
I mean, Jolyon, I don't know if you're able to even give us the beginning of a sense of how much all of this has cost the public purse, taking Trudi all the way to this and now into an appeal.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about low hundreds of thousands of pounds would be my guess. The fact that they took such a long period of time to decide whether to progress the contempt prosecution, I think signals that they spoke to a lot of lawyers. This stuff never happens cheaply. It may well be right to say that they got some advice that they didn't like, and so they did some barrister shopping until they got some advice that they did. I don't regret at all describing it earlier as a show trial. I think this was something that Suella Braverman wanted to happen, you know, and I think it's all pretty ugly. Of course, they spend public money, right? So they don't care, but we should care because it's our taxes being used for a purpose that is, I would say, not a good purpose.
There was actually a question earlier on from Jesse on YouTube. He or she asked, was it not a direction from the Home Secretary Suella Braverman that climate motivations were not to be spoken in court? You know, you were saying, is this all part of this direction coming from Suella Braverman and the Attorney General? What do you feel about that?
There's a funny thing about our constitutional setup in the UK that I think is too little commented upon. The fact that there are no safeguards for the independence of the judiciary, so that Rishi Sunak can send out a press release threatening judges who he described as recidivist, repeat criminals, an extraordinary thing for a putative Prime Minister to say about the judiciary. And for that threat to be a plausible threat, one that could be taken, and I believe was taken very seriously by judges. Certainly it marked a shift in how judges thought about me and about us. is a function of the fact that judges have no higher law protection. That's very unusual in substantially every other developed democracy in the world. The leader of the executive can't just snap his or her fingers and say, I'm changing the law, so judges have to do more of what I want and less of what I don't. And so, as it's true of Rishi Sunak, if it's true of Rishi Sunak, obviously I believe that it was, so it's also true of a very, very aggressive Home Secretary who found herself from time to time, I think quite conspicuously, using the language of fascism. And judges respond. I know they respond because they say that privately they explicitly say that they worry about this stuff. In Hungary, in Israel, when judges were threatened by the leaders of the executives with having their independence interfered with, in worlds where that would require a change of the law, everybody knew exactly what was happening, and so hundreds of thousands of people would take to the streets. The European Union would get involved and threaten Hungary with removal of EU funds. But in the United Kingdom, because there is no higher law protection for the independence of judges, this stuff all happens very, very quietly. Yeah. Sunak doesn't need to change the law because he can cause judges to adjust to his way of thinking simply by issuing a plausible threat.
The judge at the Royal Courts of Justice who threw Trudy's case out, in his statement he said something along the lines of, it's fanciful to suggest that Trudi Warner's action, he'd seen the CCTV footage, could be classed as contempt of court. So I was, having heard that, and that was pretty, damning statement, I was then really surprised to hear that 22 days later we hear, the Solicitor General, the Attorney General is going to appeal this. Question to you both, perhaps Trudi first, were you surprised when they appealed?
I was prepared for it to happen. I had a lot of people saying to me they had no legal grounds for appealing. But I said, I'm not sure that normal rules apply. And as you said, it was so Orwellian that it, that it even happened in the first place. I thought, I'll believe anything. And I was kind of prepared, but when the message came through, I did the need to sit down. I did say some words which are quite unrepeatable.
You can tell us, Trudy.
Very carefully, I really can't. And I very carefully read...
It's only the three of us.
the indictment, and just trying to work out what grounds they had for appealing. And there were two things really that angered me. One was that it was absolutely misrepresented what I did. They had absolutely misrepresented what I had done, and they had imputed motives to me that were entirely false. Because apparently the Solicitor General can read your mind. Okay? And reading those two things, I was outraged, because I thought, actually, this is public money being used to fabricate a case against me because I am politically inconvenient.
Were you surprised when it went to appeal?
Well, I mean, no lawyer reading Mr. Justice Saini's judgment would have recommended an appeal. But that's probably true as well of the decision to seek permission to bring the prosecution in the first place. I mean, it all bears out the characterisation of it as a politically motivated show trial of Trudi for telling the truth. And I think actually it's hard to improve on how Trudi put it. This is not a case that is bound by the normal rules of legal procedure. It's a case that is all about politics, where lawyers have consistently gotten it wrong because they've approached the exercise as lawyers, and politicians, and I put Trudi and myself in that benighted box for the moment, have consistently got this stuff right. The interesting question, I think, now is, well, what will happen on a change of government, right? We will find out very early on whether the new Labour government is going to be as intolerant of politically inconvenient speech as was the Conservative Party when whoever replaces the present Attorney General decides whether or not to continue with this prosecution. So it will be a really important moment in our understanding of who and what this new government will be. So I hope we all recognise it as that, because that is what it will be.
Yeah, very much so. We've just got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to throw a few questions and comments that are coming through. Serena has said, this has been absolutely fascinating. I hope you do another one to keep us up to date with the most outstanding human that is Trudi. So let's see what happens with the new government coming in and whether the appeal continues. Sue has said, I think everyone's watching in some disbelief. Thank you for putting this together. The police and court are so scary. Thank you all. And I think, this has been, when I started this, I said, I didn't know what to expect when I started investigating this, but what has happened is not what I was expecting. And, it is this disbelief. And you've pointed out very eloquently, as somebody who's white, woman of a certain age, certain privilege, to actually suddenly seeing this, it is quite shocking, and certainly some minority groups will probably go, told you so. That's actually been answered. Tim has said, is describing this as Kafka-esque. Indeed, Ollie, who you saw in the first clip, he talks about how Kafka-esque this whole thing is. It really is. And so it goes on. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to hand over to you, Jolene, to sort of wrap this up, and if that's okay.
Yeah. You never know when you start out on one of these journeys where it will end up. You've talked about you not understanding when you made your first film and it sort of exploding. Trudi's said very much the same about what she thought may even, although I'm not going to invite you privately to confess it, have hoped would be a small intervention at the end of which you'd get to go home and stroke the cat rather than find yourself in a prison cell. And it's also true for Good Law Project and for me. We always want to be standing with those who are outside power. We think that's a freedom that we as an institution have. It's where we sit in the climate, protest, ecology. We can do stuff that bigger charities can't do, and this I think is a really, really important part of our work. I mean, looking forward, Good Law Project's going to be active, I think, in trying to stem the rise of the far right, which is becoming a very, very important source of climate misinformation. We're going to be interested in abuses of corporate power. We're absolutely going to carry on holding government to account as well. And we may return to that with which we started, which is the nature of the United Kingdom's relationship with the EU. I think it is ripe for us returning to the reality that we now understand of exactly what the costs of Brexit are and how they can be reversed. And if Labour isn't planning to go there, then we will do our best to make sure that they do. Meanwhile, as I mentioned at the top, we'll be hosting a screening of Liz, your film about Trudi, at a location in central London in, we hope, September. We will be issuing invitations to everybody on our mailing list. We very much hope that a lot of you come, and if a lot of you do try and book tickets, we will have repeat showings. It would be really, really lovely to meet a lot of you in person, and Trudi would love to come along as well. In the meantime, please do look at the website of Page75 Productions. This is an incredibly interesting film that Liz is making, and it is one of many incredibly interesting films that align Liz's work with that of Good Law Project. I hope you found it a good use of 90 minutes of your Tuesday evening, and we will see you all again very soon. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.